Evening and what's going on. I'm not surprised when these things happen. It doesn't make me gasp in shock. And I think I agree with Mike Huckabee, which is one of the few men that had on television that had something good to say. He said we didn't have a gun problem, we don't have a violence problem, we have a sin problem.
Amen.
That is the reality of this.
Amen.
Whatever you think of what happened and what your beliefs about guns are, I have some very strong viewpoints about it. But regardless, that night, Friday night, millions of men went to bed and kissed their wife goodnight and rolled over and went to sleep in peace. And those same men, those millions, had guns in their closets and ammo stored up. And they chose not to go hurt anybody.
Amen.
Night after night, this is the way it is in America. But one idiot, lunatic, who is obviously evil at his base, what my understanding is, he's spitting at the guards and spitting at other convicts as they walk by. He's just gone off the deep end. The left will use this time to try to say it's time to bring guns under control.
That's right.
Amen.
The truth is that we are at war.
That's right.
In this country, we don't recognize it, we don't give it, but there is as much death going on by godless people as there was in the 1800s with the Indian attacks.
Amen.
The only difference is that we're not armed. My viewpoint is, I think it was Shepard Smith on the Fox Network said, what's going on in Denver? It's like the Old West out there. No, it's not. If it was like the Old West, he would only have gotten off a couple of shots and then some well-armed citizen would have dropped him.
That's right.
Like the cur dog he is. All right? So, it's not like the Old West around here. We have been disarmed and that continues on. So, that's my viewpoints about that. I hope that he meets an early end and is ushered before his Creator and gets to talk to him. You know, if it's the Lord's will that he would turn it into a testimony for his glory, I would have nothing wrong with that at all. Wouldn't bother me a bit. I am subject to the King of the universe.
Amen.
And I've learned to step out of the way regarding his plan. Know that this stuff is going to continue, you know, and it'll increase. Now, this is just the first movie attack. There's about 5 very public church shootings. So we're under fire. You know, that's why I jokingly said a couple of weeks ago that it wouldn't bother me if every woman in the church had a concealed weapons permit. Somebody walk in, all they hear is a click a bunch of times, you know, and it'd solve the problem. Whoops, wrong church, see y'all later kind of deal. But
Men can die by the pews.
what I'd like to do is I don't want to apologize, but we'll take a kind of a quasi-apology. The last 2 messages have ended abruptly, and it was kind of by design because they are meant to fit together. And I want to tie the last 2 messages with my brother's message that he preached here 3 weeks ago. Okay? So I want to start with the last one that we did, and that is Joel chapter 3, verses 1 through 2. In those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all nations and bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment against them concerning my inheritance, my people Israel. For they scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land. Stop there. We cannot look at end time scenarios and God and the nation without understanding that God's view of the world is filtered through his people Israel, period.
Amen.
All right? You might be anti-Semitic. If you are, you're in the wrong church. You might be viewing Israel as a pariah among the nations. regardless of your viewpoint, they are God's chosen people. They have been under God's judgment. That's His business, not yours. And when He decides to exalt them and lift them up, He will do it without consulting you.
Amen.
The issue is that we are on the right side of this. Now, there's this obscure verse in Isaiah, and I didn't look it up. I just thought of it while I was standing up here confused and dazed. In the last days, people are going to run up to a Jew and say, hey, let me walk a little bit with you because you got an in with God. Okay? This is where it's coming to, and this is the way we need to think. God's purpose for the world and purpose for the future is going to center and be surrounding Israel, whether to bless or to judge.
Amen.
All right? God and the nation concerning this point. God and America concerning this point. I find it interesting that every time an American president has done something to trip Israel or show them who's boss, that little pipsqueak Middle East nation, we've bit the bullet over it. And I'll give you this example. There are a lot of them, but I'll give you this example. One of the first things that George Bush did in office was to force Israel into giving up its settlements in the Gaza. All right? There was a few settlements in the Gaza Strip. And I don't know if you remember it, but it's a big deal. There were several of the kibbutz people that were living, had moved into their synagogue and were on the rooftops, and they were standing against their own army, and were finally forced out of the Gaza Strip. 3,000 Jews were forcibly moved from the land that God had promised them. All right? 2 weeks later, 300,000 Americans were moved from their homes forcibly. Katrina. This is a coincidence of the highest order and one that we should pay attention to.
Amen.
Because God, if God is in control, and the psalmist tells us that his voice is a mighty wind, that He controls the weather. Job goes through it in great detail. If you have any questions about God and the weather, read Job. George Bush pushed Israel. That was his ball. George Bush paid a heavy price for pushing Israel and 3,000 Jews. Right? And I loved George Bush. But he was wrong on Israel, and every American president that we've had since, all of them have been wrong about Israel. We are their big brother. We got to tell them what to do. We have divided up their land. We are pushing them out. We are telling them where their boundaries are. If they don't do what we say, we'll hold our weapons from them so that they are essentially defenseless. We play this game with Israel. I want you to remind, I will enter into judgment against them, the nations. Concerning my inheritance, God is not saying it's the Jews' inheritance, it isn't. It's the inheritance that He gave to them. Concerning my inheritance and my people, Israel. Concerning, for they scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land. There is something that is heavenly judgmental when it comes to dividing up that acreage over there. You say, well, this is a spiritual battle. You bet it is. But we are Christians, so we view things through our inheritance. Okay? Our inheritance is a heavenly kingdom that will be administrated by Christ on the throne on earth. Okay? The inheritance that belongs to the Jews is this land that God has written His name on. Between the Mediterranean and the Euphrates River, and between the Euphrates River to the north and the Sinai to the south. All of that belongs to them. That's their inheritance. That's what he's talking about here. And the world, the nations, will be judged according to how they do this with Israel. That old saying.